Hi guys, I'm making just a new video for the operation of our boost controllers because it's been a long time. The one video I have on YouTube is quite a few years old, so I just wanted to do an updated one just to help people out. Now, this is my boost controller. That's my bump box. This is kind of just a custom thing that I made just for my cars. It's kind of a one-off thing, but we're just going to go over the operations of the boost controller. All right, your main screen here. The boost and the gate, these are live PSIs. It's not going to show any numbers here unless the controller is making the gate pressure or the car is making the boost. So just remember that. That's actually the live gate pressures. And it also has an indication to let you know if your trans brake button and your bump button is working. So anytime you push the trans brake button, you see that T pop up. So that's a yellow wire in the controller. So anytime the yellow wire sees 12 volts or 16 volts, you will see that T pop up. So that lets you know your button works. If for some reason the T is on and you push the button and the T goes off, then you've got a backwards trans brake button. And also the scramble button. See, an S comes up. And if you've got the boost pulse combo, the scramble button is also the bump button. So that lets you know that your bump / scramble button is working. And anytime you're testing the bump, you'll hold the trans brake button and then tap your bump button, and that lets you know that your bump is working. Now this particular controller here is just a boost controller. It doesn't have the bump in it, mainly because I have a secondary controller over here. Really the only reason why I separated them is because this controller has like some custom stuff in it, just stuff that I did for my car. So I separated them so I can test and do some R&D on some stuff. But like I said, as far as the controller, your main screen shows your live boost, your live gate, gives you the indication that your trans brake button or your scramble button is being used. Programming, super simple. The M button, that's get you to the menu. So that's your launch PSI. And like I try to tell people, this controller, all the PSI numbers in here in the settings are not boost. These numbers basically add to your spring. So if you've got a 5-pound spring in there, theoretically, if everything was perfect, any of these numbers in here would just add to that 5 pounds. So if I had a 5-pound spring and I had this 6 in there, that would theoretically make 11 pounds of boost. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it falls in place like that perfectly, but most of the time it'll be off one way or the other a little bit. So anyway, that's where you would go up or down and set the launch PSI. And the launch PSI, this mode only happens when you're on your trans brake button. When you're on your trans brake button, it goes into this mode, and that's what it's going to try to apply to the top of your wastegates to add to the boost that your wastegates will make on just spring. So we hit enter, and that's how many stages you want. And these are time stages that basically just go one right after another during the run. Some people run a bunch of stages. I generally use 2 stages, sometimes 1. It's very rare that I'll use 3 or 4 or 5, but some people have use for it. I don't normally. So that's how you would set how many stages you want. And this is where you would set the stages to do whatever you want. Like the first stage, this is a delay time from the time you let off the trans brake button. So basically what this first stage is saying is a half a second after I let off the button, it's going to try to ramp to 30 psi gate pressure at a rate of 8. The rate number basically is just an arbitrary number from 0 to 50, and the single digit numbers is going to be like a really slow rate where it builds up to the 30 slow, and the bigger numbers like 30s, 40s, and 50s, usually that's faster than the turbo can build the boost. So those are pretty fast numbers. So at a half a second, I've got it building to 30 pounds at a 8 rate, which is still fairly fast. That's not bad. So after that, 2.5 seconds later, And what this 2.5 seconds later means is after this stage. So if this stage, after this stage started, so this stage started at 0.5, then this stage technically starts at 3 seconds. So at 3 seconds, I have a slower rate of 5 to build to 35 pounds of gate pressure. And if you have more stages, it's the same thing. Each stage is a delay from the previous stage. So it's pretty simple to set these numbers. And these numbers, if you want to see what they're doing while you're programming them, you can go to your log screen and you can kind of run a cycle on it and see. And I'll show you that in a minute. So we're going to hit that button and we're out of that. All right, if we want to just make sure on what our scramble stuff is set on, this up button, you hit it, and right now I have mine set on a force of 35 pounds. So that means anywhere into the run, if I grab the scramble button, it's going to go straight to 35 pounds of gate pressure, no matter where it's at. If you change this to add, this is another good feature here. Whatever number you have in here, which you wouldn't normally have a number this high, you may have a number like 5. What that means is anywhere in the run that you grab the button, it's going to add 5 pounds. So if you had 3 different stages, each stage would have an additional 5 pounds on it all the way to your last stage. So it just adds a little bit on your stages, versus the force does exactly what it says. It forces it straight to whatever you have it set on. And I kind of mix that up. Sometimes I use add depending on what I want to do, and sometimes I use force. It just kind of depends, but force takes over everything. All right, so now from this screen, if you're making passes, a very important thing is to look at your log screen after your passes, so you can see what the controller actually did. And that's the E button. So from the main screen, if you press the E button, that should store in there the last thing that you did as far as making a pass on the car. So this is my last pass from Saturday night, and this was a pretty good pass. And this is the settings that I had in it too that we just went over. So there's the half. This bottom line here is the gate. The darker, thicker line is the gate. The one at the top is the actual boost it made, and I've got them offset so you can see the difference between the two in the program. And I don't have it where, you know, if they were both 0, they'd be in the same spot. I actually have it moved up so they won't cross up each other. So as you can see, and when you're on the screen, you can use the up and down to scroll across the screen at any point and see what the boost and the gate pressure was. So as you see at the very first line is where it would be whenever I let off the trans brake button. So the gate was at 6 and the actual boost was at 8 pounds. So, and you see the gate is holding at 6 until right at 0.5 seconds. Because remember, I had that 0.5 second delay in there. So as soon as it hit that, then it starts ramping the gate pressure, and you see the gate pressure ramps up to the 30 psi. And then my next stage was at 2.5 plus the half, so it would have been 3 seconds. So if you scroll over here to right at 3 seconds, you see that's when the gate pressure comes up a little bit more and then flatlines. And you see the boost corresponds to what it's doing. So then it goes up to 35 and it rides 35 out. So this screen is really important because you can see what you do after a run to make sure that everything did what it's supposed to, because you want to always make sure that whatever you have the controller programmed for, it's actually doing it. So like if I looked at this log, and let's say this area here that I had it programmed for 30 psi on the gate and it made 30 psi, but let's say I had it on 30 psi on the gate but it wasn't making it. Let's say it was struggling down here and it was only making 26 pounds. Well, that would tell us that we've got a problem somewhere, like more than likely a leak in the system or something. So you always want to pay attention to this screen, because there's a lot of good information, because it's letting you know that the controller is doing what you have it programmed to do. And also it's good to use this screen if you're putting new settings in there and you just want to see what they look like. And for example, let's say I want to change this up. Let's see, I'm gonna put 1 stage in it. Okay, let's just say that I've got this setting. I changed the launch to 5 psi. I've got the time 0, rate 5, psi 30, and I just want to see what it looks like. I want to know at this rate how long does it take to get to 30. So we'll go out of here, and what we'll do is this down button. The down button will manually activate the controller. And what I mean by that is when you're normally running the controller, it's fully automatic, which means it will activate itself, and it activates itself based on 2 psi boost. So when it makes 2 psi boost, the controller activates and it runs through its cycle. And that works that same way. If you're on the trans brake and you're spooling it up, when it hits 2 psi, it activates and it goes into launch mode. If you're driving down the road and you just roll into the throttle, as soon as it hits 2 psi, it activates, and then it starts whatever you have the stages programmed on. And but this down button allows us to manually activate it so we can test it and see what it does without having the car running and trying to make 2 psi boost. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna push the down button, and you see it goes up to 30. Okay, you grab the trans brake button and it bleeds down to the 5. So we can hear what it's doing. Now if you hear the solenoid out there just slowly clicking, that's actually, when you hear that, that actually tells you that you have a small leak somewhere, because it's steady trying to keep it at 30. So I have a small leak somewhere. It's not a bad leak because it maintains good, but that will let you know whether you have a leak or not. If you got it fully sealed up with no leaks, you won't hear it. It'll run up and stop clicking. So that right there is telling me that I have a leak right now. Not a big one, it's a small one, but it is a leak. So always be mindful of that. If you hear this, and if you hear the solenoid clicking fast, like really rapidly fast, then that's telling you that you have a really bad leak. So definitely have to look into that. But so now let's say we just saw what it did. It made the 5 on the trans brake, it ramped up to the 30, but we want to visually see what it did. So we'll activate it, and then I'm gonna hit the E button to go into the data log screen. So now I want to see what it'll do. So I'm gonna grab the trans brake button, and then I'm gonna let go of the trans brake button, and there it is. That's what it would technically do if you were making a run. Do it again. Grab the trans brake button. That's my air compressor there. So we saw what it did. So we're gonna get out of that screen, deactivate it, and we're gonna go back to this. So now we see that with the rate that I have set in it, that it will basically peak at around 1.92 seconds, and then it regulates the rest of the way out. And you know, a lot of times on the controller, when it's ramping up to a PSI that you have it set at, you know, don't worry if you see it spike a little bit. So like, let's say right there is 30, 31, and then it backs down to 30. That's normal, because as it's building pressure, it can't just stop on a dime. It's a good possibility you're going to see a slight overshoot, and then it's going to stabilize, and that's just common because you can't just instantly stop very well. So be mindful of that. That's not a big deal. If you see it spike just a little bit and then jump back down, that's perfectly normal. So anyway, this lets us know that that setting I got in there will make it to 30 psi by 1.88 seconds. So that's how you can check your settings. If you have settings with multiple stages and stuff, you can always use this data log and the manual activation to run it through its cycle. And like I said, then you grab the trans brake button and stuff. And also, like, you can also check your scramble too. So there's my trans brake, it's running through its cycle, and then I'm gonna grab the scramble. So there's, and my scramble is set on force of 35, so that's exactly what it does. Let's see, I'm gonna let it ramp up, and I just grab the scramble and see it forced it straight to 35. So always use that to test your settings, so you make sure everything is working, and you always want to make sure it's working before you go to the track and stuff. And the only catch to testing it like this to make sure everything's working is you would have to have your solenoids connected to either an onboard air compressor setup or a CO2 setup. If you happen to be running the controller just off of boost pressure to supply the solenoids, then that makes it a little more difficult to test it like this. You know, at that point, if you needed to test it, it would be best to have, you know, either have an air compressor at home, or one of your buddies may have a regulated air compressor that you could put a regulator on, and you could connect that to the feed of your solenoids just for testing. If you that is if you normally have it running off of the boost pressure for the supply to the solenoids. But if you're running on CO2 or onboard compressor, that makes life so much easier, because you can test it so much easier and you can verify that everything is always working. Because, you know, you could easily go out there one weekend and make a pass and notice that you're not making hardly any boost, and, you know, may end up just finding a burnt line or something, or a pinch line, or just something simple like that could be easily found by just doing your basic test before you go to the track or something. So even though the controller will still work perfectly fine if you're just running off boost pressure, and you know, some people that may be their only route because they may not have any other use for having an onboard compressor or CO2 setup, and that's fine. That works good. It just makes it a little more difficult to test. You'd either have to, like I said, find somebody to use their compressor to connect to it, or actually just go out and road test it to see what it does. And if you road testing it, you just go out there and roll in the throttle, and as soon as it hits a 2 psi boost, it'll start running through the cycle. And if you're making boost, it'll start showing whatever you have it programmed for. But another drawback to running the controller off of boost instead of CO2 or compressed air is usually you can't make as much boost, because you'll reach a point where you need to make more gate pressure than the boost that you're trying to make. So let's say one car, if they're wanting to make 20 pounds of boost, it might take 25 pounds of gate pressure to make the 20 pounds of boost. So if you were running off of boost pressure, you would never reach that level, because you're going to hit a point where it's going to take more gate pressure than the boost pressure. So you'll have a point where no matter how much you turn it up to, it just flatlines at a certain boost, and that kind of lets you know the limit of what your system can do if you don't have some type of compressed air or CO2 system on there. So, which if you got a street car or something that's not making a lot of boost, usually that's not a big deal. I tell people that, just as a general rule of thumb, if you're running the controller off of boost for the supply pressure, then usually you can only make around twice what the gate springs are. So if you have a 10-pound spring in your gate, you might only be able to make around 20 pounds. And that will vary quite a bit depending on how big the gate is. If you have a smaller gate, like in the 30 or 40 millimeter gates, you can generally push that boost level a little further. But if you have like a 50 or 60 millimeter gate, you definitely won't be able to make as much boost, because the bigger the gate, the more it's going to need on the gate, more pressure it's going to need on the gate. So where if you had a 40 millimeter wastegate, maybe to make 20 pounds of boost, it only needed 20 pounds of gate pressure. But if you had a bigger wastegate, like let's just say for instance a 60 millimeter on the same car, you might need 30 pounds of gate pressure to make 20 pounds of boost, because the diaphragm and stuff in the valve in that wastegate is so much bigger that just your exhaust back pressure and everything works against it so much more efficiently. So the exhaust back pressure is going to be putting a lot more pressure on it to open it up. So it's going to vary quite a bit. So that's kind of a good thing to know there too. And I think that pretty much about wraps up the operational part of it. Yeah, I believe that's about it. I don't know of anything else. That's just a nice little operational video just to give y'all an idea of exactly how it works and how to test it and how to verify that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's actually a pretty simple controller. It's easy to program. It's easy to troubleshoot. And everything about it's easy, and it works. It does its job. I mean, we've got a lot of these out there, and they work really well. People like them, and they're quick and easy to adjust. You know, I have people ask me all the time about, you know, what about my ECU, my Holley, or my this or my that has boost controller, and it does. I tell people, I say the boost controllers in these ECUs work fine. There's nothing wrong with them. But what I like about this is I like the standalone boost controller just because you can really change it anytime you want to change it, any direction you want to change it. Because there's a lot of times I'll be in the staging lanes and see a car ahead of me either spin, or maybe some cars ahead of me, you run really good numbers, and I'm like, okay, track's either better or worse, and if I feel like it, I can go in here and make a quick change in just a matter of seconds. If I just need to launch a little bit more, I'll hit that, go up, go down, enter, check my stuff, bam, I'm ready. So, you know, 5 seconds you can make a big change on it if you need to. So that's always a big advantage to it. But anyway, I'm going to tie this video up. That's just going to be a newer video that people can watch instead of my older one, because my older video was basically the same thing, but back then it didn't have the T that popped up on the screen and the S that popped up on the screen, so I just want to make sure that that's included in the video now. But that's about it. I'll do another video a little later on the actual wiring and plumbing, just to go over that with some people, because even though the instructions, they're laid out pretty good, there's still some things that people miss on it, so I'll try to get a video of that later and add that in there too. Alright, catch y'all next time.